To ask a follow-up question, I'm going to do my best to try and word this properly. But I think you used a fascinating term earlier on when you spoke about, the construct of Black America. And to be provocative for a second, sometimes I wonder if maybe the reason why we end up having these conversations repeatedly is that, like, it's about trying to interrogate the construct of Black America in the first place, which is to say that we end up thinking of Black Americans and Black people generally as this monolith of whom can have the same political interests. And you were talking about earlier how hip hop stars end up having different class interests, and that makes things different for them. But then hip hop as a cultural phenomenon sort of reinforces this idea that Black people constitute a cultural group when, I don't think they do, right? They're a racialized group, but they're not a cultural group in the way we ordinarily understand a cultural group to be. And I mean, that can be contested, but hip hop plays this role of raising people to believe that Black people can have those same interests because they quote unquote constitute a people. And how do we overcome that to sort of say, well, they're not this homogenous grouping who by having these shared experiences for sure end up having the same interests across the board as a result.
Yeah. So I feel like, I'm a Pan-Africanist, so I do. So I feel like, two things. I think you can be a people and be diverse, right? So you can be a community and you can be diverse. You can have lots of different exchanges in that. I mean, I think what I do think about what you're saying, I think this idea of Blackness and becoming monolithic with hip hop is not so much, I think, a product of sort of hip hop, sort of the cultural phenomenon, but is a product of hip hop, the commodity, for sure. And so, like, one of the things I think, like, how do you even know something is hip hop, right? Like, and there's these kind of signs and symbols that are easy, that get sold, right? And I think a particular kind of urban Black maleness, right? That's what it is. And so everyone is supposed to look like that, think like that, reflect some part of that, right? Because of how this happens. But I think one of the things about Black America, this idea of Black America, which was also part of the kind of what I didn't talk too directly to, but is also part of what inspired the article, was this idea of a mainstream Black politics. And I think this idea of a Black America, right, that is like a Latinx America and an Asian America and a Native America, all these like specific, sort of like discrete cultural groups, right, that have become a part of this multicultural America who have this seat at the table, right? And I think trying to have a seat at the table is a political outlook that I think has that emerges after the civil rights movement, right? Where it's like, well, we're going to give you more rights, we're going to give you more inclusion, but without really fundamentally shifting anything in the system that's operating, right? And so then you have folks like, and this is sort of a side note, but like, I don't know if you saw this recently where the actress Eva Longoria was like talking about the vote, and she made this point about how like, yeah, Black women did something, but really it was the Latinas or like whatever, right? And so, she came and she apologized. But like part of the reason why that even construction exists, right, is because each of us have to prove, right, how we belong, how we should be included, because there's not enough for it to go around, right? So even though there's a seat for you and a seat for you and a seat for you, it's like there's only one, right? You can't have two, you can't have three, you can't change anything around. And so I think part of the issue around, thinking about Black America is how Black America has become, I think, in like sort of since the civil rights movement, a very national thing in a kind of really small way, right? So there's only a Black America that is only interested in what happens in the contiguous, like 48 states, maybe Alaska and Hawaii too, and everything outside of that is not really relevant or doesn't really matter. And I think that is a danger. And I think that, of course, goes along with the sort of access to capitalism, because this is what multicultural inclusion promises you, right? You can be a part of this nation, but only this nation and only in these ways, right? And ultimately, this nation in these ways aren't really about equity, right? They're really about just a kind of a multicolored status quo. And so I think that is when Black America becomes problematic. But I think Black America, however, hasn't always been that way. I think there are plenty of folks in the United States who are Black people, whether they have roots in the South, or they have roots elsewhere, who see themselves and their faiths linked, yes, because of their shared experiences of race, but also because of what those shared experiences of race compel us to think about when it comes to questions of equity, freedom, justice, and equality, right? Those are the kind of things that come up too. So I think that's my long answer.